Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by the good people at CACI, Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
Believe it or not, I'm going to say something positive, not just about California, but specifically a California regulation.
And see, I was going to say, please don't say something stupid. And here we go. It's going to be something stupid.
Well, you and I have for years have taken pot shots at California for all of the stupid laws that they passed there. And so I ran across this thing, and the first three words in the article are New California Law. So immediately I'm expecting some nonsense. I was going to actually just forward it to you, sight unseen as Foolishness of the Week. But then I read the thing, and this is actually, I think it's an excellent idea. It hits close to home for me because I'm a gamer, or I was an avid gamer for many years. In this law, it's an attempt to bring transparency to the buying and selling of digital goods like movies, ebooks, and video games. The law requires that stores be specific when you purchase. I'll use a video game as an example. When you purchase a video game, they be explicit about whether you are buying it or merely licensing it.
Yeah, that licensing nonsense really pisses me off.
It does. And the licensing thing wasn't a thing back when I was a gamer, because when you bought a game back then, you literally bought a game. It was in a box, it was a disc, and you install it on your computer. And now games sit out there in the cloud, and many of them require other players, which means there has to be a server that's hosting the thing. And the long and short of it is that really what you're getting is access to a game that isn't sitting on your machine at all.
And more than that, you can't sell it.
Oh, no. And you can't sell it. Exactly. Yeah. In fact, some of these companies have rules about that.
I go buy a game for $60 on physical media.
Right.
I play the game. I sell it for $45. Life is good. Now I buy a game for $60 on one of my consoles, and it sits on the console.
Right.
And I can't move it. I can't do a thing with it.
And that's a good touchstone. If you want to ask the question, do you really own something? Ask whether you can sell it. If you can't sell it, you don't own it.
You don't own it. Not even close.
I thought this was an excellent thing. And this falls into a category that you and I talk about a lot when someone asks us, okay, well, you guys are against so many regulations. What regulations would you be for? And I'm for any regulation that protects property rights or helps to define the property rights. And in this case, it's kind of doing a bit of both.
A little bit of both. Probably more definitional than protectional.
Yeah. Now, what surprises me here is California could have gone off the rails, as it does so often, by passing a law that would outlaw the licensing and saying, well, henceforth, you can only sell the games. You may not license them.
And let's be careful here, because you obviously haven't read the law, and I haven't even heard of it until just now. I could virtually guarantee you that it's got something boneheaded in it.
It may well have, but notice the big difference here. This is a good example of government doing its job well versus doing its job poorly. You've got this problem where somebody ostensibly buys a game, finds out they haven't really bought it, they really don't own it, they licensed it. Two ways you can deal with that as a government. One is you outlaw the licensing. The other way is you say, okay, fine, you want to license, you just be upfront about it. You be very clear about what's going on. That second model of do what you want, just be clear about it, lets the market work out the thing. There may be certain games that don't lend themselves to being bought and sold, but do lend themselves to licensing. And the first law that would outlaw the buying and the selling, or outlaw the licensing rather, would do away with games like that.
Now, I remember when this started, it was probably 15, 20 years ago, and I believe it started with tax software, of all things.
Yes.
You would buy your tax software for the year, you would put it in your computer after you paid the money, and it would say, agree to this license, you don't own this.
Right. Yep.
Well, I just paid for it. I mean, put a sticker on the box if I don't own it. Because I think when I get a box in a store and bring it to the register and pay for it, that whatever was in that box, I own that.
There are all kinds of arguments about, well, yeah, but, the company can't really sell you the software because you could copy it. And back in the day, the way companies dealt with that, I had a number of pieces of software that enabled you to install the software on a machine. And some of them, I remember Lotus allowed you to install on 3 machines. And if you wanted to install on an additional machine beyond that, you had to uninstall it from the one. So somehow the thing kept track on the disk of how many times it had been installed or whatever it was. There are ways to deal with that.
Well, yeah, but the downside from the corporation's perspective is that there's always a way around copy protection.
Yeah.
Literally always. Now, how much effort you're going to expend is the open question, but there's always a way around. I hope this leads to something where people actually understand what they own and what they're renting.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a just fine outcome. Now, I want to, of course, given that it's election season, and as we covered with our Patreon friends, I am, in fact, a political scientist. I should talk about politics, right? Those are the rules. And there is a Republican congressional candidate in your state, Ant, the great state of Virginia. His name is Derek Anderson. Have you heard of him?
No. Mm-mm.
You must not watch the local news.
I don't.
It shows it's good that you keep up with current events like this.
I'm too busy studying.
Studying Wisconsin's economy. That's what you've been doing this last couple of days. Well, Derek Anderson put out a photograph of him with an attractive blonde woman and 3 little girls, I guess 2 little girls and 1 teenage girl. I'm looking at it right now, and I don't know how we're supposed to describe people anymore without everybody losing their minds over it. But I'm just going to assume that these are all women I'm seeing in the photograph, except for Derek there. Problem is, they're not his family. Problem is, he borrowed them from a neighbor. Because he is an unmarried man running as a Republican, and he can't quite figure out how to do that without softening his image. So
he borrowed the neighbor's family for a photo shoot.
Now, in fairness to Derek, he told the obvious lie that people pose for campaign photos all the time. Yes, they do. This one was obviously taken by a professional photographer out in the wild somewhere. And then later, he put up a photo of him and his fiancée, which, who knows if that's what she really is, but, like I care one way or the other. I just think it's hilarious that people have to fabricate families now to run for office.
Well, I don't understand what's going through his head. Did he think somehow that in this age of everything being digital and accessible through Google, that people wouldn't figure out in about 30 seconds what he had just done?
I'm telling you, man, I can't tell a lie for more than 45 seconds right now without getting caught.
Yeah.
A quick romp through my public-facing Facebook or my Twitter feed. And oh, by the way, if you're not signed up, you've already missed my live tweeting of the vice presidential debate. Serves you right. If you think, as a male Republican candidate, that you're going to have trouble because of your party's take on abortion, well, I guess you should be talking about that instead of trying to find a bunch of women to take a picture with.
Yeah.
As if that would matter. And that could have easily qualified as the foolishness of the week, but oh no. Oh no, and this, I think, should make up for last week when you and I got so sidetracked that I forgot to give the foolishness of the week. That episode hasn't run yet. I can't wait for the hate mail to come flooding on in because of that. It'll be only the second time since the foolishness was introduced that we've missed it. And I got so much hate mail last time that I vowed never to miss it again, and look what I went and did.
Who was our listener, Hoojin Boom, who complained about this?
There were a lot of people that complained about it. And I believe it's Hogan Boom.
Yeah, well, he's kind of become the poster child, the representative of people who are annoyed at things we leave out of the episode.
I don't think he listens anymore, does he?
I don't know.
I haven't heard from him.
I haven't heard from him in a while. Yeah.
Here's a newsflash. People come and people go.
Right.
But anyway, we're back once again to our former leader and big toe, Donald J. Trump. And for those of you who know me, you know I have an absolute love of wristwatches. I just love them. And Donald Trump has unloosed on the world a series of wristwatches.
Trump watches? Really?
Trump watches. They say Trump right across the dial. And the flagship is a gold tourbillon with diamond bezel, which costs $100,000.
Oh, my God.
Now, a tourbillon used to be extraordinarily expensive, about $50,000, $60,000 once upon a time. When the Chinese tourbillons came along, and this is just a different kind of movement that regulates the time. The Chinese tourbillons came around for about $50, $60, and that caused the Swiss to drop their prices precipitously, and you get a full Swiss tourbillon movement right now for about $6,000. It's a 200-gram case, so it's about 7 ounces worth of gold. That's what, 15, 16,000 with a 4 times markup. The diamonds are apparently the kind that you see in floor sweepings where they cut the diamonds.
Right, sure. The dust, yeah.
The funny thing here is that the watch, he bills it as Swiss. It is clearly a Chinese movement.
The anti-trade guy is hawking Chinese watches.
The same clown that says he's going to slap a 100 or 200% tariff on Chinese goods is trying to sell you a Chinese tourbillon for $100,000.
Well, on the upside, it's going to jack up the price of those tourbillons. So buy one now before he's elected.
I do not think that is correct. This is an $8 watch minus the cost of the gold, and I'm not spending $100,000 to melt down something that's going to net me $15,000.
Yeah, you would think that at that price, something comes with it, like dinner with Trump or something. I don't know.
I can't say it. All the things I do say, trust me, I cannot say what I think should come with a $100,000 watch. You can all use your imagination. That's where we stand right now. I can't wait for this election to be over. God, I hate. For those of you who say I pick on Trump too much, maybe so. I'll throw this one out there. I actually am starting to think that Kamala Harris is drunk every time I see her.
Really?
I really do think that. She just seems hammered every time I see her.
I have to say, I have not paid attention to any of this, largely not because I'm not interested, but because it's so close and there's so much noise in the system. I'm just waiting to get closer to the date when numbers start to mean a bit more.
The fun thing now is that whatever the October surprises are going to be, they're coming in the next few weeks. Okay. What do you got? What have you been saving? What powder have you each been keeping dry? This ought to be ridiculous.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
I hear told that you have something intelligent for us to talk about today. Can that possibly be right?
Well, it is right. I've been doing some research for my regular job into population growth.
Or the lack thereof, you mean?
Or lack thereof. Started off as an add-on to research I was doing anyway of here's what inflation looks like, forecasted economic growth and blah, blah, blah. And then I threw in population. And the first time I threw it in, I thought, that's strange. I'm looking at U.S. population over time. It does this kind of 3-step thing. Prior to the 1980s, it's rising at an exponential rate. And then starting in the 1980s, it's rising at a linear rate. And then starting about 2000, it starts to slow down. So it's still rising, but it's rising at a slower and slower pace until like last year, the year before, it actually tops out and starts to come back down again.
A couple interesting things here. You've happened on a topic that I also care about. What were the odds of this happening? I think when I last looked into it, we need 2.2 live births per woman to maintain our current population. And we're down to about 1.8, if memory serves, when I last looked.
Yeah.
Which makes 2 interesting things. The first, okay, however we would define Native American in the current sense, right? Not in a demographic sense, but people who live here right now. We've got a population decline. And we all know that the population keeps going up, which means immigration is pretty strong. But if you put an end to immigration, we're all going broke.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is I was looking at this graph of the population topping out and then starting to decline. In the very last year, so it would have been, I guess, last year, 2023, there's an uptick, a strong uptick. And so I'm looking into that. That was solely immigration. If you take out immigration, we continue on the downward path.
How do you think Social Security is going to work out under those circumstances?
That's the first thing I started thinking about is I linked it to Social Security and said, look, this is part of the problem of you have more people drawing off Social Security than are paying in. And I would repeat that when I made presentations around the country. And the more I talked about it, the more I realized there's a lot more going on here.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm starting to think about is the relationship between population and economic growth. I submit that that is going to be our major limiting factor on economic growth over the next 2-3 decades. It's the fact that our population size has become limited.
And you have to be careful here, right? Because it's limited. I think the best thing to say is we know for sure that it will not grow at exponential rates anymore.
Yes.
Under the current circumstances.
Yes.
Right. And that's both on the live birth side and on the immigration side.
Yes.
You're going to have to figure out what to do. And the Republicans, they're onto this. They see this. And what are they talking about endlessly? We got to have more children. We have to have policies that favor more children.
Yeah.
And everybody says, oh, you're a pack of retrograde thugs. Well, or do they know this? I submit that maybe both of those things are true.
Well, the thing is, if you want an example of that, look to China, who did it in the extreme. They had their population limiting laws, and now they've found, oh my God, our population is declining. Now they're going the other direction. They're requiring people to have kids.
It's too late. The way demographics work, it's too late. Now there's 1.5 billion Chinese right now. The Chinese government itself predicts that in our lifetime, well, maybe our children's lifetimes, there will be 500 million.
500 million. Good God, down by 2/3.
They're predicting that they will be down by 2/3 because they're on a demographic cliff right now. They got all these old people and no young people coming up behind them.
Right.
And the old people will all die. And any welfare state is doomed when that's the case. And if you want to see what that looks like, go take a look at Italy.
Yeah.
The Italian birth rate, all jokes about Italian virility notwithstanding, the Italian birth rate has been declining for decades.
Yeah.
And they have to import Turks to do the labor.
Mm-hmm.
And they're running out of Turks. Well, what do you do now? Who's paying in for that massive European social welfare state? And the answer is not nearly enough people anymore.
Yeah, and Italy has it easier than it would otherwise, being a member of the EU. Part of its economic ills could be pushed off onto other EU members, and people can freely come into Italy from other EU countries.
And more than that, Ant, it's a wonderful place.
You're right, yes.
If you sit back and say, well, where will I move? Italy's going to make your list. China's not.
Right.
Right. So there's that. And even so, they can't get enough people in to keep the welfare state moving forward. And when that happens, you're in for a hell of a ride. And that's going to happen here if the birth rate continues as it has been going.
Yeah, we're going to have this problem. So the first problem with the welfare state, and of course, the bigger the welfare state is, the bigger this problem is. We've got the problem that's been bothering me of late of our economic growth is necessarily going to be limited because our population is limited. The fewer workers you have, the less the economic growth. But then there's something else that I don't think people are aware of. It's almost become a truism in this country that real estate increases in value over time.
Not if there's not enough people.
No, yeah. If the population is declining, house prices, land prices are going to start going down.
They won't go down, they'll tank. You won't be able to move out of a house.
Yeah, what happens when our houses retain value like our cars do?
And what's going to happen then? Local governments will not take the assessments down, and you'll be paying massive taxes on a house that isn't worth near what the government says it is, which means you'll never sell it.
Right.
You'll be foreclosed out of it, but you will never sell it. And this is an interesting thing, right? When you step back and take a look at the whole thing, because you and I know, and I think a lot of other people who have taught at the college level know, that it's still in the water that overpopulation is the world's biggest problem.
Yes. People keep saying this. Yeah.
It is not. And they've been saying it since Malthus walked the earth.
Malthus, and I was just reading today, I'd forgotten about this guy, Paul Ehrlich, who became really popular in the 1970s with his book, The Population Bomb. He claimed that by the 1980s, millions of people will be starving worldwide because we couldn't feed them.
And by the 1980s, we were living at a higher level than we ever had before, and that's only been increasing ever since.
Yeah.
And Ehrlich, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's the one who killed his girlfriend and left her in a sleeper trunk in his closet.
What?
So I guess he did his part for overpopulation.
I'd never heard this.
Was it him? I might be confusing him with somebody else, but nonetheless.
But the thing that annoyed me is apparently his book was very popular. He did interviews, of course, but then into the 70s and 80s, when this population crash never happened and the mass starvation never happened, people started holding him to this and saying, okay, well, what's going on here? He refused to admit he was wrong.
Yeah, no, that's right. I remember somebody offered to bet him like $1 million.
Yeah.
He didn't take the bet.
Yeah.
The guy was Ira Einhorn was the guy. He was an Earth Day guy. He killed us.
Not Ehrlich. Okay. But that business, when I was a young faculty member, good Lord, I must have been about like 25, 26 at the time. At my first job, I got into some online debate. I shouldn't say online because there was no internet then, but it was the campus-wide email discussion list. Got into a discussion with one of the scientists there, taught one of the physical sciences, I don't know what, saying this so matter-of-factly as if, well, of course, everybody knows it's true, that overpopulation is a problem. I pushed her on. I said, where's the evidence that this is a problem? I mean, beyond you just saying it. And the response I got, sadly, sounded like many of the responses I get on different topics today of, well, everybody knows this is true, and if you don't believe it's true, you're just blind. That's the extent of the counter-argument.
My personal favorite is, everybody knows and you're an idiot.
Right, yeah. And yet, the population bomb business never happened. In fact, all this projection of exponential growth, which did occur, but it naturally topped out.
Imagine that.
Yeah, as countries got richer, people's birth rates went down.
And I can go one step further and say, if and when the Earth's natural resources are ever fully taxed, population will cease to grow.
Right.
There's a natural ebb and flow to these things. And you don't have to deal with it at all. There's no policy you have to enact. It will take care of itself every time. And we're right back where we often are at times like this. Don't do something, just stand there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is the best advice I can give to politicians.
One of the things I think people imagine is a scenario in which you just wake up one day and the world's resources are gone. And now everybody dies, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're all starving and there's no water or air.
Yeah, and that's not the way it happens. This happens gradually over many decades that certain resources become harder and harder to get. And so the prices will start to go up. And as the prices start to go up, people respond. And one of the ways they respond is by having fewer kids. And you might say in response to all of that, okay, but there's your evidence that the world's resources are disappearing because people are having fewer kids. It's becoming more expensive to have kids. To which I respond, no, it's not becoming more expensive to have kids. It's becoming more expensive to have kids in the style that we currently have them, which is a far more expensive style than people had kids 100 years ago.
And look, 100 years ago, I probably would have had 8 kids because I would need them to work on the farm or in whatever family business we had.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what our lives are like anymore.
Yeah, and the combined quality of life of those 8 kids wouldn't come close to the quality of life of 1 kid today.
And, you hesitate to put it in these terms, but children were a commodity and now they're a luxury item.
Yeah, and you see this. I lived for a number of years in a little village in West Virginia. There was a cemetery there that dated back a couple hundred years. And you see there, as you see in many old cemeteries, the gravestones, the father, the mother, the daughter, whatever it is, and then a couple of gravestones that just say baby, because they tended not to name their kids until a little bit later because the mortality rate was so incredibly high.
You don't want to get attached.
Yeah.
And look, you've seen me give this lecture before, but in 1860, give or take, the average lifespan in the United States was about 35.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 32 if I'm pulling it off. It's 80-something now, or 79.
In fairness, people who made it to age 20 or thereabouts back then
That's right.
did indeed live to 85. But the problem was very few people made it that far.
1/3 did not. When you step back and take a look at birth rates across the globe, you find that in all the advanced Western industrialized countries, birth rates are quite low.
Yeah.
In the developing world, they're still quite high. Exactly what you would expect, given everything we've just said.
Yep.
And as developing nations become wealthier, their birth rates will in fact drop.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know this? That's always what happens.
Yeah.
Unless something different comes about in terms of humanity, unless they start behaving in a radically different way, or if some kind of intervening variable comes that we've literally never seen before, that's how it's going to go. And it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that that's how it's going to go. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.